Hello and welcome to Inside Reform Today. My name is Matthew Abel and we have a very special guest with us today, Congressman Joseph Knollenberg. Welcome, Congressman, and thank you for coming to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I want to give the viewers a bit of a background regarding Congressman Knollenberg. He is the congressman from Michigan's 11th Congressional District, taking in much of southwestern Oakland County and part of Wayne County. He was elected, he's currently serving his 4th term in the United States Congress. He was elected in 1992. And currently he's serving on both the House Appropriations Committee and the House Budget Committee, something that the congressman has explained to me is fairly rare for a congressman to sit on both of those monetary committees. He's also a member of the Standards of Official Conduct Committee, what's commonly called the Ethics Committee. Again, welcome and thank you for coming to the show, Congressman.
Thank you.
This show is called Inside Reform Today, and it was started by some of the Reform Party members, and we've attempted to bring in diverse viewpoints, and we've heard from a couple of challengers, actually, who are running against you as third-party candidates. I've not heard of a Democrat yet announce to run against you, but I assume that there will be, and perhaps a Libertarian as well. And Congressman, I guess one of the things I want to talk with you about first is campaign finance. Races have gotten incredibly expensive, and I pulled a lot of information from the internet. The figures in the last election in 1998 indicated that you raised over $1 million through the congressional campaign and spent $992,000 plus. Do you think that political campaigns are getting too expensive?
Political campaigns are expensive. I don't know of a way, though, that you would conduct them where you didn't have a function of money for one, of a candidate for number two, and then finally you have to have an organization. I'm mindful of my own election the first time around. I ran in a primary with 2 other candidates. They outspent me 10 to 1. Now, what didn't show up on the radar screens was I did have an organization. And I had, that was below the radar of most of the media. So it's a function of not one, it's a function of all 3. But you ask a question, are they expensive? Yes, and they're getting more expensive. If you look at New York with the Senate race between Giuliani and the First Lady.
And the Senate race here in Michigan.
And here too.
Promises to be incredibly expensive.
And I would say to you that what is the alternative? If the alternative is public financing, I think that would be a huge mistake. I think we're better off with the current system with some modifications or changes, which we can talk about. But if you leave it to public financing, then you're suggesting that the taxpayer has to bear the cost of funding, and it may not be any savings in the end. And now you're getting to everybody, not just the people that want to contribute to, let's say you, Matt, if you were a candidate, or me. It's all the taxpayers that have to contribute to that. So I think until we really sort out exactly what we want to accomplish by campaign finance reform, we look at what might be worse. And if that bothers us, we should stop and look back at what we may have to do to change it. I think some things could be done, but we can talk about that.
Well, what do you think specifically?
Well, one thing, for example, we should make sure that every single dollar, every dime gets reported. There should be disclosure, full disclosure. If anything, I think that it's up to the individual, which is a First Amendment right, to contribute to a candidate if he so chooses. Nobody forces them to do this. But if you need this money to combat the attacks of your opponent or opponents who may be using union strength, or maybe using the time that could be contributed by a union member without even contributing a dime, they could give you their own time, their volunteer time.
Sure.
That, in essence, is a campaign contribution, but it's not categorized as one. And I think also, if anything, I would recommend that we provide some reform that, well, one easy one is to deny anybody that is not a citizen of this country the right to contribute.
Absolutely, and that's
I think that's easy. And then we should also, you know, since 1974, we haven't changed the limits on campaign funding. I'm talking about the individual limits.
The caps.
The caps.
Right.
The $1,000, for example, that has never been adjusted. Currently, it buys about $333 of value. The $1,000 contribution buys only about $333 of actual campaign impact.
In 1970.
That's right. That's right.
Okay. I'm sure you're aware that public financing has passed in Maine, and that a federal district court there has said that there are some permissible curtailments of contribution limits based upon the appearance that this big money is influencing elections. Do you agree with that? That perhaps, I mean, do you think it's just plain a First Amendment violation, or that the First Amendment would allow for us to try to correct things that just are blatantly, obviously?
I don't think you can change what is out there. 10 times as much money is spent by lobbying firms as they spend or contribute to campaigns. Your top 10 firms, they spend 10 times as much, almost 9.5 times what they would actually contribute to candidates. So they're going to get their message out one way or the other. Either they give it to the candidate directly, or they have enough money, I'm talking about the media outlets, to buy a think tank and make independent expenditures or whatever.
Right.
And let's face it, a lot of lobbying goes on in Washington that does not have anything to do with actual money reaching a candidate's doorstep. It's lobbying, paid lobbyists come in to talk to members of Congress and, of course, state legislatures around the country.
Sure, but there's widely a wide perception that a campaign contributor will have better access to have their voice heard, not necessarily to achieve their objectives, but at least to gain access, where a little guy like me doesn't have the access to walk in and say, Congressman, I think this is an issue that needs to be looked at.
I would say this: you have as much access as they do because you're a constituent. If you call me and want to talk to me, and if I'm available, I can talk to you. My staff can talk to you. And just because they're paid doesn't give them any more access than it would to you.
Okay.
Now,
well,
this is something that you'll find if you talk to my staff. We sat this morning with an individual who is a constituent. I've never received a dime from him, don't expect it, may never. And the point is he had a problem. He would like to seek a possible congressional assistance on solving that problem, and we spent some time with them.
okay. Well, I think that's good. Congressman, I was looking at your receipts, and I want to talk about a couple of them. You've accepted money from tobacco lobbies, RJR Nabisco, Brown & Williamson Tobacco, and Philip Morris, totaling $3,500. And then you've also voted for tobacco price supports and subsidies.
That's right.
There's clearly an appearance, to me at least, that those things are related. Can you say to the constituents, the voters, that those things are not related? And the fact that you accepted money from Brown & Williamson and RJR Nabisco and Philip Morris didn't influence your vote?
Actually, I was voting that way before they even came forward. But the point I would raise with you is this. Yes, I have supported tobacco supports. If, in fact, the small tobacco farmers in this country weren't supported, we wouldn't have any tobacco at all. And then guess what? We wouldn't get rid of tobacco. We'd wind up buying it from Europe or other places around the world and paying more for it than we are domestically. So I think there's a reason why we should help the small tobacco farmer. Most of these people earn $7,500 or $10,000 a year. That's their money, and that's their cash crop. And they raise it on a very, very small plot of land. So I think it's a case where if you didn't help them in this regard, and by the way, you may call it a subsidy, but what would you call it if we were paying half again as much for tobacco coming in from Europe? What is that? That comes out of our pocket, and the smokers are going to pay that. And here's the other thing that bothers me about...
Well, it seems to be the federal government is subsidizing smokers. Let the smokers pay whatever the going rate is.
Well, what if we raised the pack of cigarettes by $1.50, and some have proposed that, some 75 cents? The government, there's a little hypocrisy here too. The government wants the revenue from tobacco, right?
Right, sure. They want
and yet they say they want you to quit smoking, but really what's the truth? The truth is they want the person, you have to reason this out, want that person to buy a pack of cigarettes, so there is a tax on it, so they can use that as revenue to do whatever government wants to do.
Okay. They tell me we have about 2 minutes to a break, and I wanted to ask you, back on campaign finance reform, I've been working with an organization called the Campaign Finance Network in Michigan, and they're asking officials to sign a pledge that would say, as an elected official, I'm concerned about the increasing role that money plays in elections. I hereby offer my public support for the establishment nationally of an alternate campaign finance system, one that is both constitutional and voluntary. Under such a system, candidates agree to limit spending and to forego private fundraising. In return, qualifying candidates receive a set amount of public funding to run for office. I take it you would not sign
I would not
such a
sign that,
pledge.
not in a million years.
Okay.
What you're saying is you want politicians to be on welfare. This is welfare for politicians.
I'm saying I want all of us taxpayers to pay for campaigns, not just large businesses and
So
PACs.
you think it's great that everybody in the neighborhood should pay?
I think only individuals should be allowed to contribute to campaigns, not political action committees. And I think that's a big
Well, now you're
problem.
saying something different, though, Matt. What you're
Well,
saying is political action committees are different than people. And
Right.
when you talk about public financing, you're talking about every taxpayer has to bear the cost of that. Now, what makes you think that the guy next door to you wants to do that?
Well,
I
he's
think-
bearing the cost of these bloated
No, he is not.
expenditures, actually.
He's not bearing the cost if, in fact, he's not paying, so long as it is not mandated that publicly he has to be taxed and pay for it in that fashion. So I would say that that's freedom of speech. I elect not to give any politician any money. And so long as we have this kind of system, I think it would be better.
You heard it here first from the horse's mouth, folks. We're going to take a break, and we'll be back shortly. Thank you, Congressman.
You bet.
And we'll be back in a minute.
Thank you.
Our planet's rainforests are burning. Less rainforest means less rain and an even greater threat from global warming. Right now, you can join the National Arbor Day Foundation and support Rainforest Rescue. Your call will mean that the wildlife, plants, and people that abound there will not be lost forever. In the few seconds I've been talking, a forest the size of 5 city blocks went up in smoke. You'd better call now.
And welcome back to Inside Reform Today. Our guest is Congressman Joseph Knollenberg. Again, thank you for being here, Congressman. I had a lot of issues I wanted to discuss with you. In fact, one of them is term limits. I read somewhere that you were in favor of term limits, that you felt it should be 6 terms in Congress, if I'm correct, which would be 12 years. And I'm wondering if you're still in favor of it, now running for your 4th term. And if you are, whether, if Congress passes term limits or not, whether you would honor that and agree that not to run after 6 terms.
I have made that pledge, 6 2-year terms. Now, one thing that's interesting is when that pledge was made, people were staying in Congress 20 and 30 years. Now, I happen to be in this senior category of Congress, having been there only 4 terms, on my 4th term. So a lot has changed. In other words, term limits is working in many regards, and that has not, however, changed my attitude about my original pledge. So,
well, there are no term limits on the federal level, however. But
that's right.
Some state term limits are forcing people to run for higher office. Is that what you're alluding to, that how it's changing Congress?
I'm only saying about Congress is that even though there is no prohibition, no limit, that people are leaving Congress, or not having it as a lifetime occupation. And that's why I mentioned the fact that I am in the upper category, or the seniority of Congress only my 4th term. That wouldn't have been thinkable 10 years ago.
People always talk about pork, and generally congressional officials who are in the seniority have more of an opportunity to direct appropriations, if you will. Can you say that you've brought home the bacon to the district, and can you tell us how and where your power on the Appropriations Committee has benefited the residents of Michigan's 11th District?
Anytime we vote, we're voting the will of our district. Many times it also involves the will of the country, or the concern or security of the country. But I rarely vote when I don't do something that's beneficial to Michigan, in my judgment. When it comes to actual pork, let's classify. What is pork? Pork is maybe a necessity for you.
It's the spending in the other guy's district.
That's
is
right.
What pork
so
is,
keep in mind that, yes, I have brought money back to what I believe are worthwhile situations in Michigan. For example, the Rouge River, the 12 towns cleanup situation. Here we're trying to clean up the environment, and I have sought funds for that purpose and continue to do so. I also, here's an example that's not pork, but I probably have saved the federal government in terms of estimated dollars, almost $90 billion on the nuclear waste removal or cleanup. They projected this cost to be well over $250 billion. We've got it down well below $100 billion over the next 10, 15, 20, even 40 years if necessary. So that's a way of saving money, taxpayer dollars. But yes, I think that you said it well. I think it's what is pork for one may be necessity for another.
Do you think nuclear power is a solution to our increasing demands for electricity?
I do. I also think that we have to have a blend of energy sources, including coal. We can do clean coal technology, and we are. We can do nuclear, we can do gas, we can do hydro, and we can look at doing what we can with solar, wind, and biomass. We have to have all those things in our arsenal. We can't just go ahead with one. We can't say we're going to concentrate on solar. It's just not going to happen in the near term, and people are using more energy, so we've got to rely upon all of these energy sources.
There's a recent report from the Michigan Environmental Council indicating that in the summer of 1999, Michigan experienced over 30 days when the air was unhealthy to breathe, and they attribute that to our reliance on coal, the dirtiest form of energy, to run power plants. Do you agree that a lot of our air pollution is caused by coal-fired power plants, and what can we do to clean that up?
Coal is being cleaned up. In fact, if you compare the coal that's burned today with 20 years ago, it's much cleaner. Let me point out to you that nuclear has almost 22%, produces almost 22% of the energy in this country, a little over. And it doesn't emit any emissions, none. It's clean and it's green and it's there.
Well, the plutonium's not green. I have to differ with you on that. Plutonium has a half-life of forever, basically.
Plutonium has something, we can do something about that. We can put it in Yucca, Nevada. There's a place,
underground
it's safe,
storage.
it's as safe there as it would be anywhere. And perhaps unbeknownst to a lot of people, plutonium can be put in a mode where it's in a more secure mode, and we do transport it and have done it for 50 years around this country. But let's get it out of your backyard and mine and put it someplace where it's safe, and it's been proven to be safe.
But you agree that plutonium is a dangerous item?
Weapons-grade plutonium, you bet your life.
And so wouldn't it be better if we created less of it?
Sure. It
And
would be.
couldn't we do that through alternative energy, through solar and wind power?
Do you want to put
and
all
hydro?
your eggs in one basket and
No,
say
but we haven't got
solar?
hardly any eggs in the alternative energy basket. We have all our eggs in continuing to work with older power plants. When the Clean Air Act, well, I don't know about when it started, but one of the goals of the Clean Air Act was to phase out the older, dirtier coal-fired power plants.
And they are doing that.
But what they're also doing is they're extending the life of those plants so that they don't have to phase them out and build newer, more expensive plants. So I'm concerned that the electric utilities are basically avoiding the congressional intent.
I don't believe they are at all. Matt, there's a thing called the EPA, but you and I both want the same thing. In fact, I want the same thing that the Environmental Defense Fund wants, but I don't want to get there using their techniques. We disagree on how to get there. We all want clean air. We want clean water. We want, if we have to, rely upon all of the sources of energy that there is. We don't want to leave any one of them out. So we disagree on how we get there, but not on the fact that we want clean air, clean water. And I believe we're getting there. Again, I repeat what I said at the beginning of this conversation. We're much better off today. It's much cleaner today than it was 20 or 30 years ago, and it's getting cleaner.
We're burning a lot more of it today than we were 20 or 30 years ago, though.
But in terms of the air, particularly in the metropolitan area of Detroit, in the southeastern Michigan, it's cleaner today than it was 15 years ago.
Well, what did we do about the 30 days in the summer when the air was unhealthy to breathe?
That air could have been twice as bad 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago. I would tell you again, it's cleaner today than it has ever been. And you know what? When it comes to automobiles, the auto industry is doing a great deal to lower emissions. Whether it's fuel cells that's in the future, I believe that that should be considered as a high priority. So whether it's using some kind of solar combination with a conventional engine, that's a way to reduce emissions. And in short, if we do all of the things that are being planned to do, we'll be much better off, and this will be a better environment than it is, not just today, but it'll be better in the future. And I also think that we get there by using a blend of energy sources.
And speaking of that, during the break, you and I were talking about federal incentives on solar and wind power. Could you tell us what those are?
When it comes to research and development, nuclear and coal have a subsidy, we call it an R&D subsidy, of about 5 cents on the kilowatt hour of production.
Okay.
If you compare that to solar and wind and biomass and photovoltaics, which is the highest, I might add. They spend, in terms of a government subsidy, something like $17,000
Per kilowatt hour.
as compared to 5 cents. And I'm talking about the subsidy, Matt. Let me also point out
But there
to you,
are very few solar and wind power kilowatt hours.
that's my point, because frankly, if we can't get it commercially viable, then we have to stop and think, what are we doing here? Why don't we put some money into the things that do work? 50% of the energy is produced by coal, 22% by nuclear, 10% by natural gas, and about 10% by hydro. It's just a little pinch. Less than 1% is produced by solar and wind, maybe a couple percent by biomass. What we should be doing is balancing our investment, if you will, our government subsidy, if you will, in the things that do work, and I think we can get there in time, and perhaps, who knows, in a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10, we'll have greater solar output than we do today, and that's clean.
Perhaps.
But I remind you that nuclear is clean too, and yes, you can do something about the nuclear waste, and we have a place to put it.
Well,
it's called Yucca, Nevada.
I'd rather we didn't have to find a place to put it. Are you aware of the new windmill up near Traverse City that
Very much so.
one of the power companies has established there?
Which is also subsidized.
Well, you're probably aware then that the people who are living there are willing to pay extra money to have clean sources of energy, and that it's done so well that they're building a larger one near Petoskey now. And so I guess what I'm saying is, to me, it appears that the demand is there for cleaner energy, and it's just that we don't have the resources. It's not out there. We keep subsidizing coal-burning things and internal combustion engines when actually...
We don't subsidize in the fashion that you're talking about. As I said, the subsidy is very low when it comes to coal, very low when it comes to nuclear. They're putting a great deal more into the solar and wind. And by the way, with respect to wind, I hope they do attain what they want. That would help a great deal. But I would tell you that those people are doing it voluntarily. That's fine. So long as people voluntarily, not by government edict or mandate, but voluntarily want to do this, I think that's fine.
Well, okay, I think that's good too. The other thing that the report from the the World Wildlife Federation just concluded a report that indicated that if we were to move toward non-polluting sources, that clean energy is smart policy for Michigan, that it would create $3.1 billion in annual savings and 30,500 new jobs by 2010, which is only 10 years away now. And in fact, you are one of the representatives who the World Wildlife Fund has called on, and they indicate that you've been especially vocal opposing global warming action, and they would like you to support the Kyoto Protocol. And as I understand it, the Kyoto Protocol is a treaty that's not been ratified by the U.S. Senate at this point, and Lord knows if it ever will be. But could you explain to the viewers just briefly a little bit about that?
Let me say, look, these two firms or two organizations you've mentioned are very liberal.
Absolutely.
Very liberal. I oppose their approach to things. I don't oppose their ultimate goal. I think we all have the same goal, but they would like to bind this country to mandates using governmental regulation, etc., to conditions that, frankly, we would suffer by. I'm talking about the economy would suffer. That's the whole problem with the Kyoto Protocol.
Well, this study indicates the economy would not suffer, that actually the economy would profit from all the new research and development.
Every economist in this country, even the White House, even the DOE economists, there's 5 separate studies that the Department of Energy has done, say it will cost money. They disagree in terms of the amount.
You're speaking about adhering to the Kyoto Protocol?
If they were to. That's right.
That's what would cost money?
Yes, because what it does is it binds the U.S. to use less energy by 7% than they did in 1990. And it allows the rest of the world, the developing nations, to spew at will, to continue to pollute. What I'm recommending is that let's get together on this and bring about voluntary programs within this country and around the world, rather than mandating that the U.S. if we were to bind or be bound by the Kyoto Protocol, and by the way, they've never sent it over to the Senate because it would never be signed or passed. Let's do what we can do, which is to not bind ourselves to the will of the international community. We have a right to, I think, secure our own destiny and do it voluntarily.
Speaking of international relations, how do you stand on most favored nation trading status for China?
For it.
And a lot of the unions and other organizations, the people that were out protesting in Seattle and that were protesting the IMF and the World Bank meetings have indicated that that would actually be not one of the more productive ways to go, and that Kyoto actually is doable. And well, I'm not sure what my question is there. But,
See, you're back into Kyoto.
Right.
Well, let me respond. Maybe you're looking for an answer to why do I think it is desirable? Because if that was the thrust of your question.
Right. As far as MFN, most favored nation.
Or PNTR, as we call it.
Okay.
Permanent normal trade relations.
Permanent, right.
Yeah.
If China is not allowing their citizens political freedom and religious freedom, and they have people working in substandard wages and working conditions, isn't granting them permanent most favored nation status just for us to throw up our hands and say, well, let them do whatever they will, let us keep buying our cheap Nikes?
Not at all. If you engage China, here's a 5,000-year-old culture. Here's a country with a quarter of the world's population. There's huge growth over there. Michigan benefits by virtue of exports to China greatly, and they will continue to. And the agreement that we drew up last fall in Seattle is one-sided. It's all on our side. We can export now where we couldn't before. They've removed many of those tariffs, and rather than lose out by virtue of giving them permanent status, we're going to win. And it's going to be jobs kept here. We'll be exporting product from here to China, not jobs to China. That's the product that goes to China.
I think that's the whole dispute. Whether
in my judgment, it's not a dispute. I just wish that our union brothers would look at it for what it is. I think their jobs will be more secure if we do have permanent normal trade relations with China.
We're about to wrap up. We only have a couple of minutes, but one other thing I wanted to ask you. I attended a town meeting you held in West Bloomfield High School in the auditorium probably in 1994, and someone asked you a question about the NRA, and you indicated you had not received any money from the NRA at that time. I notice now on the campaign finance reports that you have accepted in the last cycle, I believe it was $8,900. Have you changed your position on accepting PAC contributions from the NRA?
I haven't changed my position on accepting PAC contributions, period. So whether it's the NRA or whether it's General Motors or whether it's folks in the nuclear industry or whether it's folks in agriculture, it doesn't really matter. Those folks make the determination to give me money. I don't insist that they give it to me. They make that determination.
Well, was it true at the time that you were not taking PAC money from the NRA?
I never ever forbid taking money from anybody. The fact that they may not have given me any money, I think you're wrong about 1994. Maybe it was in 1993. Because I didn't get any money in the campaign the first time.
Okay.
Second time around, you'll find that I did, but that was their decision, not mine.
Have you ever refused when a political action committee wants to donate money? Have you ever turned them down and said,
no,
I don't agree with your position?
No, and I haven't turned down money that comes from an individual. So if you want to write me a check, I'd take that too.
Okay, well that's a generous offer. Thank you. I guess we have just a minute. Is there something that you'd like to say as a wrap-up to the viewers? I wish you had more time. I hope you'll come back. I know this is some intense grilling, but
well, Matt,
I think
I don't mind the grilling. In fact, this is like every day in Washington. But I would just tell you this, that first of all, I appreciate what you're doing, you know, bringing people in, getting some real thought going. I would tell you that as an individual that's been in Congress now for 4 terms, that I still believe the same things I believed when I campaigned: less regulation, less taxes, less government spending. Those are key. And I believe that this Republican Congress has made a big difference in the way government works. We've balanced the budget going on 4 years in a row now. Last time they did that was in 1969, and it hasn't been done 4 years in a row since back in the 20s. That's a difference.
Well, speaking of the budget, the debt is higher than ever, isn't it?
That's right. There's more people than ever.
And well, with the debt being higher than ever, you had voted against a Lockbox proposal, which was to take all of the deficit reduction money and put it toward payment of the debt. Why did you do that?
I'm in favor of paying down the debt. I'm in favor of cutting taxes. I'm in favor of reducing spending to make it only available for debt reduction. I think speaks to nobody getting a tax cut. So I think there's a problem with that. But I think that if you examine very closely all my issues, you'll find that I'm looking at cutting down cutting taxes, cutting the debt, paying down the debt, and also securing Social Security.
I guess there was some confusion, Congressman. Again, thank you for coming. It's been a pleasure having you. I hope you'll come back. I was wondering if you would consider being a participant in a debate with the other candidates who are running for the position you now hold.
Well, let us know what your interest is, and we'll decide. It's going to be a long time before we get back into a campaign mode, but
That doesn't sound like a very firm commitment.
we'll consider whatever offer is made and leave it at that.
Okay. Well, I'd like to host you and the other candidates, and we appreciate you coming very much. Thank
Yep.
you, Congressman
Thank you, Matt.
Knollenberg. Our
Thank
guest
you.
today has been Congressman Joseph Knollenberg of the 11th Congressional District of Michigan. And you've been watching Inside Reform Today. Thank you for looking in.